If you spend 50 years with your hands inside the engine bays of other people's lives, you start to understand things about the world that people who only ever look at screens will never grasp. An engine doesn't lie. You can paint. Over a rusted frame, you can put a fresh coat of clear coat on a faded dash. You can even duct tape a leaking radiator and pray it makes it to the next exit, but eventually the truth always comes out. The metal fatigues. The gasket blows, the timing belt snaps. You can't fake a foundation and you can't trick a machine into running true if the core is rotten. People are a lot like machines in that way. You can dress them up in expensive clothes, you can give them fancy job titles, you can make them smile for the camera, but when the pressure gets turned up and the heat gets high, you find out exactly what they're made of. My name is Thomas Vance. I'm 68 years old, and for half a century I've been a mechanic. I ran Vance Auto on Route 9, a little cinderblock building with a faded painted sign out front that the town council has tried to make me take down 3 times. I've rebuilt transmissions that smelled like burnt toast, I've machined cylinder heads until my shoulders screamed, and I've listened to the rhythm of 1,000 different motors to find the one cylinder that was misfiring. I know torque, I know tension, and I know how to listen to the things that are breaking apart. My hands aren't much to look at anymore. The knuckles are swollen and gnarled from decades of slipping wrenches and cold steel, and the skin is mapped with little white scars from hot exhaust pipes and sharp sheet metal. But the worst part, the part that my daughter-in-law can never quite hide her disgust for, is the grease. It's not just on the surface. It's in the ridges of my fingerprints. It's under my nails in permanent dark crescent moons. No amount of orange pumice soap or harsh chemicals will ever scrub it all out. It's just a part of me now. People look at a man like me and they see a relic. A dusty, greasy old guy who smells like Gojo hand cleaner and stale coffee. A man who doesn't understand the modern world. A man whose best days are buried under a pile of scrapped alternators. My daughter-in-law looked at me and saw exactly that. And I let her, because I learned a long time ago that being underestimated is a quiet kind of power. But I spent 50 years watching people drive onto my lot in leased luxury sedans, acting like they were too good to get their hands dirty, only to come back a year later begging me to save them when their fancy, computer-controlled machines broke down, and the dealership wanted to charge them $3,000 for a sensor. I know what lasts, I know what doesn't. And I knew the night my son called me, his voice shaking so hard I could barely understand him, that my daughter-in-law had just learned the difference the hard way. Let me start where it really starts, with the shop. Vance Auto wasn't just a business, it was the physical manifestation of my life's work. I bought it when I was 22, right after I got out of the Navy. It was a dump back then. The lifts were rusted, the roof leaked, and the office smelled like cat pee and old paper. But I had a toolbox, I had a set of wrenches my father gave me, and I had a wife. Martha. God, I miss Martha. She passed away 3 years ago, and the silence she left in the house is so loud it sometimes rings in my ears. Martha was the one who kept the books. She was the one who smiled at the customers, who remembered their kids' names, who made the coffee in the break room and kept a box of donuts for the guys on the morning shift. She loved the shop, she used to say. It smelled like honest work. She used to sit in the little glass office balancing the checkbook while I was out on the bay floor, covered in oil, wrestling a rusted exhaust manifold off a '98 Ford. We built this place from nothing. We didn't take out a second mortgage, we didn't get a bank loan, we just worked. We fixed cars, we saved every penny, we reinvested in the tools, and we bought the land next door when the old man who owned the diner retired. By the time Martha got sick, Vance Auto was sitting on 2 acres of prime commercial real estate on the edge of a town that was rapidly gentrifying. The town was growing. The old farms and diners were being bulldozed to make way for luxury condos and mixed-use retail spaces. And that's when the vultures started circling. Specifically, a development firm called Apex Properties. They didn't want my auto shop. They wanted the dirt under it. They wanted to pave over the oil stains and put up a 3-story building with an artisanal bakery on the ground floor and apartments that cost more than I make in a year on top. They'd been making offers for 5 years. I told them no every single time. This shop was my life, it was Martha's life. It was the only thing I had to leave my son, but my son David didn't see it that way. David is 32. He's a good kid, he's smart, he's sharp, and he makes a lot of money sitting in a glass office downtown, managing software deployments for a tech firm. He hasn't held a wrench since he was 16. He doesn't know the difference between a Phillips and a flathead, and he gets nervous. When the check engine light comes on in his leased SUV, I don't blame him for leaving. I wanted him to leave. I wanted him to have a life where his back didn't ache when it rained, where his lungs weren't full of brake dust, where he didn't have to explain to a customer why their car was going to cost $800 to fix. I wanted him to be clean, but in his pursuit of being clean he forgot where he came from, and then he married Sarah. Sarah is not a bad person. I want to be fair to her. She's just a product of a very specific, very shallow world. She grew up in a house where everything was curated. Her parents didn't do things, they hosted experiences. They didn't buy things, they acquired assets. Sarah is a brand consultant. Her entire life is built around optics. She measures the worth of a thing by its logo, the worth of a neighborhood by its zip code, and the worth of a person by their job title. When she looks at my grease-stained hands, she doesn't see 50 years of honest labor. She sees a liability. She sees something that needs to be sanitized. After Martha died, Sarah's campaign to sell the shop went from passive-aggressive suggestions to outright hostility. She didn't understand why I wouldn't just take the Apex Properties buyout. It was a lot of money. Enough for me to retire, enough for David and her to put a massive down payment on a house in one of those gated communities with the manicured lawns. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about erasing me. It was about erasing the dirt. She wanted to pave over my life because my life didn't fit her aesthetic. And David, my gentle, conflict-avoiding son, just went along with it. He spent his whole life avoiding friction the way some people avoid heights. When Sarah complains about the smell of oil on my jacket when I visit, David changes the subject. When Sarah tells him I need to sell the shop, David nods and says it makes financial sense. He chooses easy. He's always chosen easy, and I let him because I thought he would figure it out eventually. I thought that when the time came, he would remember who he was. I was wrong. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in late October. The leaves were turning, the air had that crisp bite to it that means winter is coming, and the shop was scheduled for a massive cleanout. Sarah had hired a high-end estate liquidation and junk removal company to come and clear out the back storage bay, the old parts room, and the shed out back. She called it a pre-market staging intervention. She was getting the property ready to list, assuming that once the junk was gone, I would finally see reason and sign the papers. I didn't argue. I just told her she could clear the back shed. But there was one thing in that shed that she didn't know about, a secret I had been keeping for 20 years. Let me tell you about the engine block. Back in the late 90s, I was at a swap meet out in the country digging through a pile of rusted tractor parts, and I found it. It was buried under a tarp, covered in bird droppings and surface rust, looking like nothing more than a heavy, ugly lump of cast iron. But I knew what it was. It was a 1969 Boss 429 engine block, the semi-Hemi prototype. Ford only made a handful of them, and they were the holy grail for muscle car restorers. To a layman, it was just a greasy, heavy piece of scrap metal. To a collector, it was a winning lottery ticket. But it wasn't just the block itself that made it valuable, it was the history. I spent the next 20 years quietly, secretly tracking down every single matching number component for it. I didn't tell anyone, not Martha, not David. I just worked on it late at night after the shop closed. I machined the surfaces, I honed the cylinders, I polished the crankshaft. I built it to be a perfect zero-mile numbers-matching masterpiece. It was worth a fortune. But the money wasn't the real secret. The real secret was what I hid inside it. You see, I knew Sarah. I knew that if I just handed David a check for $1 million, Sarah would find a way to spend it or invest it in some risky tech, startup, or lose it to bad advisors. I needed to protect the legacy. I needed to make sure it went to the right person. David and Sarah had been trying to have a baby for 3 years. They were stressed, they were spending thousands on doctors, and they were miserable. I wanted to build a foundation for that baby. A foundation that couldn't be touched, couldn't be spent, and couldn't be sold. So I took the 2-cylinder heads for the Boss 429, and I did some custom, irreversible machining. I hollowed out the water jackets in a way that didn't compromise the structural integrity, but created a sealed, hidden compartment inside each head. It took me weeks of careful welding and sealing. When it was done, I took the original cash-paid property deeds to Vance Auto, the ones that proved I owned the 2 acres free and clear, with no liens, no mortgages, and no obligations to Apex Properties, and I rolled them up. I took the bearer bonds I had been buying since David was a boy, the ones that had compounded into a massive sum. And I took a letter I wrote to the grandson I hoped would one day exist. I sealed the deeds, the bonds, and the letter inside the hollowed-out cylinder heads, welded the access plates shut, and ground them down so they looked like original casting marks. Then I bolted the heads to the block. I covered the whole engine in a thick layer of Cosmoline to protect it from rust, and then I deliberately rubbed dirt, grease, and old oil all over it. I made it look like a neglected, half-finished junk project. I dragged it out to the back shed and threw a heavy canvas tarp over it. And there it sat. 2 acres of prime real estate, $1 million in cash and bonds, and a dead man's love letter, all hidden inside a greasy, ugly lump of iron that looked like it belonged in a scrap yard. I kept the secret because I was waiting for the right time to give it to David. I was waiting for the baby to be born. But Sarah wasn't going to wait. The cleanout day arrived with a fleet of 3 massive dump trucks and a crew of 6 guys in high-vis vests. Sarah was there, of course. She was wearing pristine white leather sneakers, a beige trench coat, and oversized sunglasses, looking like she was afraid the very air in the shed might contaminate her. David was there too, standing a few feet away from her, staring at his phone, his shoulders hunched in that familiar posture of a man trying to make himself as small as possible. I walked out to the shed with my coffee mug in my hand. My lower back was aching, a deep, dull throb that meant rain was coming. I watched the crew start hauling out old alternators, rusted brake drums, stacks of oily rags, and broken lawn mowers. They were rough, tossing things into the back of the trucks, with a loud metallic clatter. Sarah was directing them, pointing with a manicured finger, telling them what to keep and what to trash. Then one of the guys pulled back the canvas tarp in the corner. He whistled. "Hey boss," he yelled to the foreman, "check out this lump of iron, must weigh 800 pounds. You want it in the truck?" Sarah walked over, her nose wrinkling as she looked at the block. The cosmoline had mixed with the dust and dirt over the years, making it look like a solidified blob of black sludge. It was ugly. It was heavy. It was the antithesis of everything she valued. "What is that?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. The foreman wiped his hands on a rag. "Looks like an old engine block, lady, maybe a tractor engine or an old boat motor. It's completely seized up, probably cracked from the frost." Sarah let out a short, sharp laugh. "Well, it's not going in the new staging area. It's a tetanus hazard. It smells like a garage. Throw it in the back of the truck. Take it to the scrap yard." I stepped forward, my boots crunched on the gravel. "Sarah," I said, keeping my voice level, "leave the block, that one stays." She turned to look at me, pushing her sunglasses up into her hair. Her eyes were cold. "Thomas, we've been over this. We are clearing out the junk. That thing is massive. It's covered in toxic sludge and it's worthless. It's literally garbage. We're paying by the pound to haul scrap away, and that thing is just dead weight." "It's not scrap," I said, "and it's not going in the truck." She sighed, the long, suffering sigh of a woman who has to explain something to a toddler. She looked at David. "David, tell your father. Tell him we can't have a rusted, greasy monstrosity sitting in the shed when the real estate agents come next week. It ruins the optics. It makes the whole property look like a junkyard." David finally looked up from his phone. He looked at the engine block, then at Sarah, and then at me. I saw the calculation in his eyes. He didn't know what the block was. He just saw a heavy, dirty piece of iron that was making his wife unhappy. He saw a conflict, and David hated conflict. He chose easy. "Dad," he said, his voice soft, avoiding my eyes, "just let it go. It's just an old engine. It's not worth fighting over. Sarah's right, it's just taking up space." The words hit me like a lug wrench to the ribs. It wasn't the rejection of the block that hurt. It was the rejection of me. He was looking at the thing I had spent 20 years building, the thing that held his child's future, and he was calling it junk because it was easier than standing up to his wife. I looked at David. I really looked at him. I saw the soft hands, the clean shirt, the avoidance in his posture. I saw a man who had let his wife pave over his own history. And in that moment, something inside me went very quiet. The anger flared up hot and bright, but then it was snuffed out by a cold, heavy clarity. I didn't yell. I didn't throw my coffee mug. I didn't tell him about the $1 million. I didn't tell him about the deeds. Because if I did, he would only see the money. He wouldn't see the lesson, and Sarah would just see a transaction. They wouldn't understand, not yet. "All right," I said. My voice was perfectly steady. "If it's just junk, take it." Sarah smiled, a tight, victorious little smile. "Thank you, Thomas. See, was that so hard?" She turned to the foreman. "Load it up, scrape it." The guys hooked a heavy chain around the block. The chain whined as the winch pulled it up. It was incredibly heavy, the solid iron groaning in protest. They swung it over the bed of the dump truck and dropped it. It landed with a massive, ground-shaking thud, right on top of a pile of rusted radiators and broken concrete. The sound echoed across the parking lot. Sarah clapped her hands together. "Great, let's get the rest of this cleared out." I didn't say another word. I turned around and walked back to the house. I walked past the bays, past the lifts, past the glass office where Martha used to sit. I walked into my kitchen, sat down at the table, and put my head in my hands. My hands were shaking, not from the arthritis. From the sheer, overwhelming weight of what had just happened. My son had let them throw away his legacy. His wife had called his father's life work a tetanus hazard. And the baby I had spent 20 years trying to protect, was currently being erased by a woman in white sneakers. I sat there for an hour. I listened to the trucks outside. I listened to them rev their engines and drive away. When the noise faded, I stood up, walked out to my own truck, and drove to the municipal scrapyard on the edge of town. I knew the guy who ran it, old Miller. I found the truck. The block was sitting in the back, covered in a layer of dust from the drive. I paid Miller $500 out of my wallet to let me take it back. He didn't ask questions. He just unhooked the chain and let me load it onto my flatbed. I drove it back to the house, backed it into the main bay, and locked the roll-up door. I stood in front of it under the harsh fluorescent lights. It looked exactly like what they thought it was, a dirty, ugly, worthless piece of scrap. I took a rag and some degreaser and I started to clean it. I scrubbed away the cosmoline. I scrubbed away the dirt. I scrubbed away the 20 years of neglect I had deliberately put on it. And as the black grime washed away, the bare machined iron underneath started to shine. The casting numbers appeared, the date codes, the prototype stampings. It was beautiful. It was a masterpiece. But I didn't care about the iron. I cared about what was inside. I took my angle grinder, put on my safety glasses, and carefully, precisely, cut the welds on the access plates of the cylinder heads. The sparks flew bright and hot, smelling of burning metal. When the welds were cut, I took a chisel and gently tapped the plates loose. They popped off with a soft hiss of breaking seals. I reached inside the cold, dark cavity of the water jacket. My fingers, stained with grease and scarred by steel, brushed against the thick, waterproof canvas pouch I had sealed inside. I pulled it out. It was dry. It was safe. I laid it on my workbench and opened it. The property deeds crisp and clean, the bearer bonds rubber-banded in neat stacks, and the letter sealed in a heavy cream envelope. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It was safe. But it wasn't going to David, not like this, not into a house where a man would let his father's life work be thrown into a dump truck just to keep his wife happy. You can't hand a legacy to someone who doesn't know how to hold it. It's like pouring high-octane fuel into a cracked engine block. It'll just leak out and catch fire. I put the pouch back inside the heads, but I didn't weld them shut. I left them sitting on the bench. Then I went to the house and made a pot of coffee. I sat in the living room and I waited. I knew the phone was going to ring. I knew David was going to call, because David is a good kid underneath the softness. And when the adrenaline of the confrontation wears off, the guilt always comes rushing in. It took 3 hours. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the living room floor when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. The caller ID said David. I let it ring twice before I picked it up. Dad, he said. His voice was tight, strained. Hey son, I said. I kept my voice mild. You guys get the shed cleared out? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing. I could hear the faint sound of traffic in the background. He was in his car. Dad, he said again, and this time his voice cracked. Just a little. A tiny fracture in the smooth corporate veneer. Please tell me you didn't let them take the engine block to the scrapyard. Please tell me you stopped them. I took a sip of my coffee. It was cold. Why do you ask, Davy? I used the childhood nickname. I wanted him to feel small for a second. I wanted him to remember who he was talking to. Because, he said, and his voice was shaking now. Because Sarah's friend, the one who does the estate liquidations, he called her. He was laughing. He said they took the big iron block to the yard, and Miller called him to ask if they wanted to buy it back because he recognized the casting numbers. Dad, he said, it's a Boss 429. He said if it's a matching numbers prototype, it's worth. He said it could be worth $1 million, maybe more. The silence on my end of the line was heavy. $1 million, David whispered. Dad, please tell me you have it. Please tell me you stopped the truck. I have it, I said quietly. It's in the bay. I heard him exhale. It was a ragged, shaky sound. Oh, thank God. Oh my God. Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know. Sarah said it was just scrap. I just wanted to keep the peace. I didn't think. You didn't think, I interrupted. My voice wasn't angry. It was just tired. You didn't think it was worth asking. You didn't think it was worth standing up for. You looked at something your father built with his own 2 hands, something I spent 20 years working on, and you let them throw it in a dump truck because it made your wife uncomfortable. Dad, I'm sorry. I'll go get it. I'll drive to the yard right now and buy it back. I'll write a check. It's already here, David. I bought it back from Miller, but we need to talk. In person tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, the diner on Route 9. Bring Sarah. The diner? He asked, confused. Dad, Sarah doesn't eat at diners. Can we just come to the house? No, I said. The diner, 7 o'clock. Don't be late. I hung up the phone. I didn't do it to be cruel. I did it because the diner on Route 9 was my territory. It was a place with vinyl booths, formica tables, and coffee that tasted like burnt copper. It was a place where people like me ate. It was a place where Sarah's white sneakers and beige trench coat would stick out like a sore thumb. I needed her to be uncomfortable. I needed her to be in my world just for an hour. The next day, I spent the morning at the bank. I took the bearer bonds and the property deeds. I sat down with Mr. Henderson, the bank manager, a man I'd known since he was a kid getting his first job washing cars at my shop. I told him what I wanted. I wanted to set up an irrevocable trust. The assets were to be placed in the name of my future grandchild. The property deeds to Vance Auto were to be transferred into the trust. The bonds were to be liquidated and placed into an index fund within the trust. The terms were simple. The child gets the income from the fund when they turn 18. The property cannot be sold, leased, or developed by anyone other than the beneficiary, and only when they turn 25. Neither David nor Sarah could touch it. They couldn't borrow against it. They couldn't use it as collateral. It was locked. Mr. Henderson looked at the deeds, then at the bonds, and then at me. Tom, he said softly, this is a lot of money. Are you sure you don't want to just give it to David now? I'm sure, I said. David doesn't need the money. David has a good job, but David has a wife who looks at my life's work and sees a tetanus hazard. This money isn't for David, it's for the kid, and it's to make sure the shop stays a shop, not a condo building. He nodded slowly, he understood, he started drawing up the paperwork. It took all afternoon. By the time I finished, the sun was going down. I drove to the shop, took the cylinder heads off the block, wrapped them in a clean moving blanket and put them in the back of my pickup truck. Then I drove to the diner. I got there at 6:45. I walked in, nodded to Marge behind the counter and took my usual booth in the back. The vinyl was patched with silver duct tape. The table was sticky. It was perfect. At 7 o'clock exactly, the bell above the door jingled. David walked in first. He was wearing a casual button-down shirt, but he still looked like he was afraid the booth might stain his pants. Sarah walked in behind him. She was wearing a cashmere sweater and designer jeans. She took one look at the diner, her lip curling in a microscopic sneer, and pulled a sanitizing wipe out of her purse to wipe down the table before she sat down. David slid in next to her. He wouldn't look at me. He was staring at the Formica table, his jaw tight. Thanks for coming, I said. Marge came over and poured me a cup of coffee. She looked at David and Sarah, raised an eyebrow, and walked away without offering them anything. They didn't ask. Dad, David started, his voice low. About yesterday, I feel terrible, I really do. I'll write you a check for the block. Whatever it's worth, I felt like I betrayed you. You did, I said. I didn't say it to be mean. I said it because it was the truth. But we aren't here to talk about the block. We're here to talk about what was inside the block. Sarah stopped wiping the table. She looked up, her eyes narrowing. What are you talking about, Thomas? It was a piece of iron. I reached down and lifted the moving blanket onto the table. I pulled back the folds. The two heavy, machined aluminum cylinder heads sat there, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. They looked like pieces of high-end aerospace equipment, completely out of place in the greasy diner. Sarah stared at them. What is that? She asked. Those, I said, are the cylinder heads for the Boss 429, but that's not why I brought them. I brought them because of what's inside them. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the thick, legal envelope Mr. Henderson had given me. I laid it on the table next to the cylinder heads. When I built this engine, I modified the water jackets. I created a sealed compartment inside the heads. I put something inside. I slid the envelope across the table. Open it? David looked at the envelope, then at me. His hands were shaking slightly as he reached out and picked it up. He broke the seal and pulled out the documents. He read the first page. His face went pale. He read the second page. The color drained completely from his cheeks. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly open. Dad, he whispered, these are the deeds to the shop and these are bank statements for a trust. A trust in the name of our baby, he looked at Sarah. Sarah was staring at the papers, her brain trying to process the information. What is this? She asked, her voice sharp. What did you do, Thomas? I set up an irrevocable trust, I said, my voice calm steady. For my grandchild. The 2 acres of land Advance Auto sits on, free and clear, are now in that trust. The bonds I've been buying since David was born, which are now worth about $800,000, are in that trust. The shop cannot be sold. It cannot be developed. It belongs to the child. And when the child turns 25, they can do whatever they want with it. But until then, neither you nor David nor me can touch it. The silence at the table was absolute. The only sound was the hum of the neon sign in the window and the clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Sarah's face was a mask of shock, which was rapidly morphing into anger. She looked at the cylinder heads, then at the deeds, and then at me. You hid this, she said, her voice rising. You hid nearly $2 million in assets inside a piece of junk in the shed. Are you insane? Do you have any idea what we could have done with that money? We could have bought the house in the gated community. We could have paid off David's student loans. We could have invested it. You could have spent it, I corrected her. Or lost it. Or given it to a financial advisor who would have charged you 2% a year to put it in a mutual fund that underperforms the market. I didn't hide it to be cruel, Sarah. I hid it because I know you. She stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the linoleum floor. You don't know me. You don't know anything about us. You just sit in your greasy little shop playing with your old cars while we're out here trying to build a life. You had no right to do this. You had no right to lock that money away. It's extortion. It's manipulation. It's a foundation, I said, not raising my voice. Something you wouldn't understand because you've never built anything that couldn't be bought. How was I supposed to know? She yelled, playing her favorite card. The victim card. You set a trap. You put $1 million in a greasy engine block and expected me to
Namunga
just
ilaka
know.
dera
You let them
khista
throw it in the
yaar,
trash.
namunga
You set me up to look like a fool.
तुझे अक्सर प्रवान
I
रहा
didn't set
अपनी
you
ऑफ
up.
तो ऊपर
I
से
said,
या
looking her
का
dead
इधर
in
के
the
बड़ा
eye.
इसलिए
I gave you a
ज्यादा
test, a test you failed. You looked at something that was heavy and dirty and unbranded, and you decided it was worthless. You didn't ask questions. You didn't look closer. You just threw it away because it didn't fit your aesthetic. If I had given you a check for $1 million, you would have spent it on a kitchen island and a vacation to Tuscany. This way, the money is safe. The shop is safe. And the baby is safe. The baby doesn't need a dirty auto shop. She screamed. The baby needs a good school district. The baby needs a safe neighborhood. Not a place where people get grease on their clothes. The baby needs to know where he comes from, I said. He needs to know that his grandfather built something with his own hands. That he didn't just buy it. That he didn't just inherit it. He built it. And he built it to last. Sarah was breathing hard, her chest heaving. She looked at David, waiting for him to back her up. Waiting for him to tell me I was being unreasonable, that I needed to unlock the trust, that I needed to give her the money. David was staring at the deeds in his hands. He was tracing the edge of the paper with his thumb. He looked at the cylinder heads. He looked at my hands resting on the table. The scarred, greased, gnarled hands that had built the empire she was screaming about. And then, for the first time in his life, David didn't choose easy. He looked up at Sarah. His face was calm. The softness was gone. The avoidance was gone. Sit down, Sarah, he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had a weight to it. A torque to it. It was the sound of a bolt finally being tightened to the correct specification. Sarah blinked, stunned. What? Sit down, David said again. And stop yelling, you're making a scene. She stared at him, her mouth open in shock. Slowly, hesitantly, she sat back down in the booth. David turned to me. His eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. Dad, he said, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I let her talk me into it. I let her talk me into selling the shop. I let her talk me into throwing away the block. I was so busy trying to be the man she wanted me to be that I forgot how to be the man you raised me to be. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. His hand was soft, clean, and uncalloused, but his grip was firm. Thank you for protecting the shop, for protecting the baby, and for not giving up on me even when I deserved it. I looked at my son. I felt a lump form in my throat, thick and hard. I squeezed his hand. You're a good man, Davey, I said. You just got lost in the noise for a while, but you found your way back. Sarah sat in silence. She looked at David, then at me, and then down at her pristine white sneakers. For the first time since I had met her, she didn't have anything to say. The script she had been following her whole life hadn't prepared her for this. She couldn't buy her way out of it. She couldn't brand her way out of it. She was just a woman sitting in a house, realizing that the dirty, greasy old man across from her had just outmaneuvered her, and that her husband had finally seen her face. I pulled the second envelope out of my pocket, the cream envelope. There's one more thing, I said. I slid it across the table to David. This is the letter. It's for the baby, to be opened when they turn 18. I wrote it last night. David took the envelope. He didn't open it. He just held it in his hands, treating it like it was made of glass. Read it to her, I said, nodding at Sarah. So she knows what she almost threw away. David took a deep breath. He broke the seal. He unfolded the heavy paper. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the diner. To my grandchild, he read, if you're reading this, you're 18 years old. You're an adult. And you own a little cinder block building on Route 9 that smells like Gojo. Your grandmother Martha used to say that a machine only runs as true as the hands that built it. And a family only runs as true as the people who hold it together. I spent 50 years fixing other people's broken things. But the most important thing I ever built wasn't an engine, it was your father. And the most important thing I ever protected was this shop, because this shop is a promise. It's a promise that hard work matters, that honesty matters, that you don't throw things away just because they're dirty or old or inconvenient.